welcome to Fun Problems, the fun of problems. I'm Peter C. Hayward.
I'm AJ Brandon.
And today we've decided to go back to our roots. Why are we going back to our roots, AJ? We hate our roots.
Well, I think when we started this podcast, you had a very, very clear vision for what this was. This was the craft. Like we could have just as easily titled our podcast "The Craft." In your model of hook, craft, spirit, what we want to do is we want to teach designers how to be able to build the best games possible.
Oh, man, that worked on like so many different levels. That was amazing. Did you write that? That was great.
No, I was actually frantic as I was clearing things off to make my desk look less messy. But recently, we've had a lot of questions relating to the industry, where it's at, what publishers are looking for, those sorts of things. And because there's a lot of people who've listened to us talk so much about the craft, they trust our opinions and want us to talk about industry stuff, which is what a lot of other podcasts focus on more. So, and particularly because we started a series where we were talking to publishers, we ended up with a bunch of them in a row and that sort of thing. But we want to make sure that we are still giving people what the point of the podcast is, tools to be able to be better designers.
Yes. I was just telling you before we started recording, I went to a playtest day the other day and I was like, God, I love the craft. I just like the mechanical part of it is where my heart lies. Like, I think I've gotten good at the selling, and that's part of why we wanted to bring that into the topic, because I'm like, when we started this podcast, I was not at all qualified to talk about getting your game signed. Now I very much am. But my heart will always be with the actual like guts of the game. I just love it. I love it. Now that's not to say we're not going to ever talk about publishing stuff again, but we want to in fact, we have another publisher interview lined up for straight after this. So we just wanted to realign to the craft. So AJ.
But first,
we're going to bookend with other stuff because we're also going to do a publishing tip at the end.
Yes.
We had homework.
Yes. So Jay called in with didn't call in.
Long-time listener, 0th time caller.
Jay wrote in a different forum about a few
not
ideas.
even directed at us. It's like as far from calling as you can get. Jay was sitting at home and we were spying on him through the window when he made a really interesting point.
Do you want to remind everyone what the interesting idea Jay had was?
Yes. So he approached game product first, which is sort of the literal opposite of what we just said we were going to do. But we want to complete our homework because we are good boys. And so he had this idea of a way of generating game ideas, which was just start with 3 bullet points. They have to be hooks. Generate a bunch of those until you have one you're more like, oh, that actually sounds really cool, and then start the design process. So it's sort of like designing from a sell sheet that we've talked about before, or designing from a Amazon product idea or a Kickstarter, which is a really, really valuable way to get your game signed. But it's sort of codified, so you don't have to think about Kickstarter or anything like that. It's just like, what are your hooks? Start from those, and if you fall in love with the idea, go design that game, rather than designing a game, falling in love with it, and being like, and now how do I sell it? Which is something I think we talk about a lot in our sell sheet episodes, especially, where it's like, you can't, it's really difficult to start from an unsellable product and try to sell it compared to starting from a sellable product.
Yeah, one thing I've seen a few times in forums is, guys, I need help trying to figure out what the hook of my game is now that I've completed it.
Yeah.
It's like, no. That's putting the cart before the horse.
That's very 2018, Peter. Absolutely, that was me. I'd be like, okay, I finished. Now, how do I, because I had my own company, so it was going to be signed by me. And then I was like, okay, I finished this game. Why will people buy it? Now, the thing that we said right at the start of the episode about like focusing on the craft, the good thing is this applies always.
Oh, yeah.
If you're just designing for fun for you and your sister to play a game, cool. The craft is as important as it is if you're designing to sell a game. And what you don't want to be, what I think my nightmare is being the designer who doesn't craft a game and sells them anyway. Oh, I think we both know way too many designers who are really good at sales and really charming, and they play the game and they're in the network. But I just don't ever want to play their games. I never want to play their games. That's the nightmare. So the craft, no matter what path you're taking, I mean, if you listen to the podcast, I don't think I have to sell you on this, but the craft is what matters the most. AJ, did you do your homework?
I did do my homework.
Yeah, no prompting. No one had to remind you last minute that we had homework.
Peter's not insinuating that I forgot. This is a cheeky jab at himself because he forgot until right before we started. But he assures me it'll be very good and you won't notice. So,
I think so. We'll find out. We have no way of knowing now. But
yeah. So my bullet points are: Shredders is a fantasy snowboarding game where you race to the bottom of the mountain using bladed snowboards. Build momentum for extra speed and powerful attacks at the cost of maneuverability. Pop-up book style modular pieces for fast setup, great table presence, and replayability. So those were in order: thematic hook, mechanic hook, and component hook.
So the pop-up book idea is that you then physically like use that as a dexterity element?
No, so the idea is think of just like, a board that's bifolded. You fold it out, and then rather than like putting little tokens on or just seeing that there's a tree in the art of it, a little tree pops in.
Okay, gotcha. But it's not like you don't then balance stuff on it like a dexterity game.
No, you might put one of your snowboarder models onto a slope on there, but no, there's no dexterity elements whatsoever.
Gotcha. I love violent snowboard. Like shredded is a very good pun. I think that's really fun. I'm going to do mine, which is less detailed than yours, even though I remembered the homework and did it months ahead of time. So it is Atlantis, and I'm sure there's other games called Atlantis, but my game is Atlantis. It is an area control game in which you are playing on the island of Atlantis that sinks into the water, and it comes in a little plastic box of some kind, and every round you pour one more glass of water into it, and so the water levels rise. And so various places that were one unit might suddenly the water now splits them, and so you're area controlling over multiple different territories as the physical, literal, actual, real life water rises.
Yeah, that's awesome. I wanted to do a game that incorporates water for a long time.
Yeah.
That's so
Me
sick.
too. So when you were like, "Hey Peter, don't forget to do your homework," I was like, "What's cool? Water. Okay, how can you do it? Oh, that's actually..." And then I was like, "Oh, this is actually great. I'm very happy with this."
So, was that 3 bullet points?
Yep. Mechanical is... Oh, you're right. It's not a hook. I just wrote area control for mechanical. That's a hook. I mean, it's weird because the component and the mechanics are very tightly integrated. Where like...
I would say like you've definitely got a component hook in water.
Yes.
That's like got your table presence and everything. And yes, that does play mechanically. But if you're mechanically saying you area control, functionally it is just a fancy way of dividing up the areas. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't necessarily...
I think there's ways, like for example, just off the top of my head, the board could always start at a random rotation tilt.
Sure.
So now it's like a spatial, like you don't know if this next glass of water is actually going to split these territories.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's sort of like a little bit of gerrymandering. I don't know. I think there's definitely a way to make that, like, because you're right, like you could just have pieces of wood that you take off. But if there's an element of like, I think this is actually going to be one conjoined piece of land, and you pour the water and you're like, no, it split my empire. No, I gerrymandered it effectively.
Listen, if it counts as only one hook, it is one extremely good hook.
Yeah.
Let's leave it at that.
I think they're all so integrated that like, yeah, it's one hook, but it covers the theme is the mechanics is the component. That was the idea.
Yeah. Love it.
Cool. Homework done. Any other follow-up?
No. Let's get into it, baby.
Okay. This is probably going to be multi-parter because AJ said he has
5 full Google Doc pages full of notes.
What are we talking about today, my friend?
Today we're talking about the thing that all designers love to obsess over: balance.
Yes, but the most important thing when you're starting a game, before you have even a hook, you should have it perfectly balanced. Before you show anyone, it needs to be 100% balanced.
Completely agree. And
this is a classic AJ-led episode, by the way, going back to our roots again.
Yes. Now, the thing I want to lead with is, as loath as I am to focus on definitions, I think there's a lot of defining that we'll need to do this episode early on. And I want to be very clear with the framework that we're viewing all these things from before we get into some general tips on how to balance your game, which are probably going to come out more in the second episode than the first. So
it's way that too late to suggest this, but we could split it into like this type of balance is an episode, this other type of balance is an episode, because I think we're going to have some really clearly differentiated types of balance.
We can figure out the titles later.
Cool.
So first
we're going to start with our hook, AJ.
First off, I want to define balance for the sake of this conversation. Balance is tuning knobs, meaning adding or removing stats or abilities, things like that, to achieve a particular goal. And the way that I view balance is through what goal you are trying to achieve. Okay. So I think a lot of designers look at balance as do you have a 50-50 win rate? That's sort of like the default. But I think there's a lot of different lenses to look.
Is every option equally viable? I think is a better way to put that.
Right. So let me spread these out into multiple different things here, because I think there's a lot of different ways to talk about this. So the first way that you can look at balance is through a lens of victory, and that is simply a skill check. Now, the way that I would define skill check balance isn't a 50-50 win rate between factions, because what you're tuning for is the skill of the player.
You lost me. Can you say that again in different words? What do you mean by a skill check in this context?
So in terms of goals, skill check is one goal of balancing. The goal here is to determine which player is the more skilled in whatever skill this game is testing.
I understand. I was thinking like a D&D skill check, and I could not understand how it like linked at all. Right. Okay, so let me try to rephrase just to make sure that I understand, and that's hopefully the listener will understand as well. You're saying that one goal of balancing your game, one use for the tool of balancing is to make sure that skill is the determining factor over who wins, rather than random draw what you get, what elements you're exposed to.
Yeah. So for instance, arm wrestle would be a pretty pure skill check game. Whoever is the stronger player is probably going to win 100% of the time. There's not many factors besides that, right?
Chess would be right up there for a completely different example, where aside from first player, it's generally the better player wins, like always.
Then there's what I would call fair chance as a balanced design goal. So the goal of this one is to get that 50-50. It's to have a roughly
50-50
equal chance.
in a two-player game,
Yes, thank you. A lot of these I'm coming at through the lens of ortho games, meaning 1v1 competitive tests of skill, regardless of if that's the main goal of what we're talking about.
Gotcha.
So for a fair chance game, for a fair chance goal, I look at that as roughly equal opportunity of winning the game. And for these types of games,
regardless of skill?
Pardon me?
Are you saying regardless of skill?
I'm saying skill is still a factor, but the goal isn't to... the goal as a designer isn't to make a system that is going to determine which player is the best by winning the majority of the time. The goal is to give both players a good game where they both felt like they had a good chance of beating the other player.
Okay, so this actually ties closely to our catch-up mechanisms episode we recently did.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Absolutely.
I think that's what inspired you to do this episode next.
Yeah. And what I would say is a lot of designers, I think, don't really consider skill checks. And I think rightly so. I don't think many people come down to play a game to be like, all right, we are going to check these 8 skills, and at the end of this game, we have determined, universally that this person's the better at this game. Because if they did, then, and that was how the game always goes, every time you play a game, they're always going to win. I mean, again, not necessarily.
Yeah, there are definitely player archetypes, player personalities, and especially genres where that is the focus. So
yes.
I work in the abstract space. That Time You Killed Me is an abstract game. I've got another upcoming abstract game, and it's something I think about a lot. And so if you're designing for the abstract audience, they want the better player to win. That's the desired goal. I'd say that's a pretty high priority.
Yes, absolutely.
And then there are certain players, and these players then become designers, and they're like, I hate dice, I hate drawing cards, I hate shuffling. Because in their ideal world, there's a quote from Kevin Smith. He says every writer is actually writing their ideal world. I think every game designer is, at some level, designing their ideal game. So for a lot of people, the ideal game is the one where the better player wins. And there is a lot of merit to that. If that's what you're trying to do, that's what your audience wants. Great. That's a great fit. So I think I disagree with the idea that designers aren't generally doing that. Maybe that's not a focus for you, but I know that in my early career, I was like, the better player has to win. That was a very strong focus for me.
It can certainly be a goal. I'm not sure if that's worth being the priority in terms of like what's going to appeal to players, but I'll leave it there.
Cool.
And then there's some like more edge.
That means I won, everyone. We had an argument and I won.
For the record, Peter, you don't have to gloat. You win every argument with me. So
it's because I edit. Just cut out the bits where I don't win.
Wow, AJ made a really good point. Let's cut that and then just have me retake it.
Yeah, let's record it again later. I have a Slack with my sister. We chat all day in the Slack, And recently our joke has been deleting the other person's comment and then just restating it as our own. So you'll be in a conversation, then you'll see them say the thing that you just said, and you'll scroll up and your message isn't there anymore. It's hilarious. If you have a Slack with your sister, I recommend it. Continue.
Sure.
That wide demographic that we appeal to.
So then there's some things that don't fall nicely into those categories in terms of victory condition design goals. Sometimes you want there to be
victory.
Yeah, well, I'm still looking at from like who do you want to win what percentage of the time, that as this sort of grouping of design.
This is still in that subset. I gotcha.
Yeah. So sometimes if you're playing a horror game, maybe you want the monster to win more often to make it seem scarier.
Right.
And then there's co-op games and stuff like that. But we'll get into those a little bit later. I just want to talk quickly through some high-level points so that we can bring these terms up while we talk about our stuff. So then for other design goals, I stop thinking about the winning of the game and the losing of the game, and I think of other types of goals that you can have within the game. So the number one thing I think design balance goals is to prevent strategic collapse. You want multiple options to be viable. If there's only one viable strategic option, there is strategic collapse. It's no longer a game. You just do the thing. That is what a lot of balance...
Again, being defined as like a series of interesting decisions. Once the decisions become obvious, they're not interesting anymore. And this is also tied to part, like this is the small form of different paths to victory.
Yeah, exactly. I think I want to run through a couple more, and then I'm going to come right back to this one, and we'll keep going.
Cool.
So thematic, like I said, providing a specific experience. You might tune the balance of some element of the game in one direction or another in order to feel appropriate.
Yeah, a classic example of this is in a lot of historical war games. If a side lost in an actual real-life war, they will balance the game, so that side is almost definitely going to lose. And for that audience, that's fine. They're not playing to win; they're playing to like give the best shot. And so, in same ways, like you can play a solo game that just has a high score and nothing else, and be like, yeah, you won. Obviously, you always like that side always wins. But I managed to hold these 3 cities that historically they didn't hold, so that's impressive in its own. Like it's a very weird, different way of thinking about game design. I think about that a lot. Example.
Yeah. And then the last one for me in terms of broad goals, again, these are very high level things, is simply having a functioning game or a functioning economy. You want to make sure that you have enough inputs to be able to generate outputs. You want to make sure that you have enough money to be able to buy the cool things. You want to make sure you don't have too much money so that buying things becomes completely irrelevant. And I think for bottlenecks, just to go into them a little bit, because I don't feel the need to go into them further down, I think bottlenecks are much more relevant to consider in games that escalate a lot, and also games that have longer play times are more susceptible to hitting a bottleneck at a certain point.
So do you have an example?
You know what? I should have come up with an example. I do not actually. Do you have an example, or am I wrong?
I'm trying to quite understand. I'm just trying to understand that. I know what you mean.
So actually, I've got one. So in Brass, this is one we both played.
I was about to say Brass as my suggestion as an example. Yeah.
One of the bottlenecks is in the first half of the game, canals, and the second half of the game, railways. I think they are called, maybe the roads. And the idea there is that those provide you access to multiple options of different places and everything. And if you didn't have the mid-game wipe of canals to then replace them with railways, then the economy of the game would be messed up because the whole board would be full. They need to have that reset in order to stop it from bottlenecking.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's not quite what I was thinking. I don't have a good Brass example to use, but I was thinking like, let's make up a theoretical game where you're shipping goods to different planets. Mm-hmm. And the first half, you're just on your planet building a spaceship. And then as soon as you build a spaceship, you have access to all the trade routes to all the different planets. If I do that 2 turns before you, I've gotten through that bottleneck early, and that can give me a huge advantage. Is that related to what you're talking about? Okay,
cool. That's another one for sure. Cool. Yeah. Again, these are very broad things.
Yeah. And so how does this relate to balance?
Well, just in terms of you want to balance the economy, you want to make sure that there are enough resources in order for players to be able to take actions. They don't run up against a wall where it's like, we're at the halfway point. I can no longer build canals because the whole board is covered in canals. those types of things. Or if, for instance, there's not enough of a resource in the system, like let's say Fable.
I think you're talking about economic stagnation and surplus, like deficit and surplus, basically. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So balancing an economy would be the sort of headline for this whole thing.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Going
up in Age of Empires would be another really clear example of a bottleneck.
Are there any design balance goals that I haven't mentioned? Because I think these cover everything I can think of.
The only one, I think you have covered this, but I just want to give a more extreme example, is breaking a game. So
Sure.
like an infinite combo, or like the classic, you win on turn one, or, you win before the opponent gets a chance to go, or you can essentially be like, hey, you skip your next 7 turns. Like, that is sort of covered. Like, you've covered that, but I just wanted to pull that out as a thing that a lot of the time when you're thinking about balancing, that's one where I think it's an emergency. Definitely do this. Focus on that.
I think that's worth flagging. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm going to run back to preventing strategic collapse for a moment.
Yep.
So in preventing strategic collapse, making sure that each option is viable, there's an economic theory. Have you heard of the Pareto efficiency or the Pareto frontier?
No.
Basically, you just
like a Black Mirror episode.
On one axis, you chart one attribute. On another axis, you chart another. You put wherever things fall onto that axis, and then the outside curve is the Pareto frontier, and those are the only viable options. So, for example, let's say we're trying to balance Magic the Gathering, and on one axis we have mana cost, and on the other axis we have their stats, attack and HP and stuff. If you have a 1 mana 1/1 and a 10 mana 10/10 on that chart, one of those is the highest on one of the parts of the graph, one of them's the lowest. But if you look at them, they both might be viable options, because maybe a 10 mana 10/10 is really powerful late in the game, and maybe the 1 mana 1/1 is really efficient. So they both have a use. But as soon as you make something that's a 1 mana 10/10 in the most extreme example, both of the other options are now completely worthless. They fall outside the Pareto frontier because it is strictly better for one than the other. And that's obviously obvious, right? Like, we all know how strictly better numbers work. But the point I would like to make is that when you're designing and trying to balance different components or different factions or whatever in your game, one way to do it is to try and think of different metrics for these things and where they would fall in them. For example, if you have decks in Magic the Gathering, you could chart the power level versus the consistency. If it's a very inconsistent deck, it can be a bit higher on the power level, those sorts of things. And again, most of the time when we're designing factions or things that are composed of multiple component parts, it gets really complicated really fast. But I think it's really valuable to think of what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, and is there a comparable other faction that is strictly worse in multiple aspects? Does that make sense?
Yes. I very heavily got into the game Soulforge. I think we've talked about this before, back when it was first released as a digital game. And one thing that I learned, this is before I was designing games on pretty much any level, one thing I learned from Soulforge is that you've got your monsters, you've got the enemy monsters, and you've got spells. So Soulforge didn't have an economy. Let me change the phrase that. Soulforge didn't have card costs. And that's something that's always appealed to me. Village Pillage has no card costs. Critter Kitchen has no card costs. Like, card costs for me are not a natural thing that I lean towards. I always just make everything free, or everything costs the same and then balance accordingly. I think it's a really useful tool, and I think we've talked about it before. But my introduction to games was sort of through Soulforge, where everything was just, it costs you one of your 2 plays, no matter what the card is. And what they didn't have was a spell that said destroy 1 creature, because that gives you no levers to pull. Once you have a destroy 1 creature spell, every other spell is either strictly better or strictly worse. Like, maybe the best you could do is like destroy 1 of your creatures and then destroy 2 creatures, but you have to like, now you literally have to enforce a cost. What they had instead was there's multiple levels of creatures, and the cards level up as you play them, etc. So they had a level 1 card that was a level 1 spell that was destroy a level 1 creature. They had a level 2 spell that was destroy a level 1 or 2 creature, and then a level 3 spell that was destroy any creature. And like, on paper, that's the same as destroy any creature, but it's really not, because suddenly you have a thing that like limits what, it's a lever that you can pull. So now in the next set, I can't remember any actual examples from the game, but they could do a card that was destroy a creature, destroy one of your creatures, and then destroy any creature. And it's not strictly worse or strictly better. It's situationally better or worse. And so one thing I'm always thinking about when I'm designing, especially no-cost games, no-cost cards, but let's say 1 mana cost, like your base card, is how do you make sure that it's not so flat that every other card is going to be strictly better or strictly worse?
Yeah, and that leads into talking about what you call levers, I call knobs, same thing. It's something that you can
Deeply
adjust.
technical terms.
Yeah. It's something you can adjust on the card it's something you can adjust on the component that you're worried about in one way or another. You could, for Magic cards, you have a lot of knobs. You've got the mana cost, the mana color, you've got the attack, the defense, the abilities. And abilities can be a million things. Yeah. Exactly. And you even have tags where it's like, this is a creature type. You can have those types of things.
You can see this is a dragon type, and a 1/1 dragon type, it might be functionally identical to a 1/1 worm type or whatever. I don't know the different keyword, 1/1 giant type. But if you have a card that's all about dragon cards, then that's so different. Even though there's no inherent difference between them.
Yeah, and that's just a free way to add depth as well, where it's like, you have a card that's, like you're saying, 1 strength but a dragon versus a card that's 3 strength but doesn't have a creature type. Well, all of a sudden, there is a reason you might play one over the other. And adds a lot of strategic depth.
Yeah.
I also want to get into power budget. So power budget is whatever class of thing we're looking at. If it's a single card, if it's an entire faction, it is the total amount of power that faction is allowed to have. So by limiting some elements of its strength, again, talking about the Pareto Frontier, we can boost other ones. So on our mind example would be the Mantis Sisters from our game with AEG. Those are ones that have a huge weakness. They've got 2 leaders. You only need to kill one of them, and they don't have particularly high health, and they don't even get to spawn in other units, which would tank hits for you and that type of thing. What they do have is extremely high mobility, so they can get away from attacks. They can get in for an attack and then leave. It's hard to get away from them. So by pulling back on some of the knobs, we can push other ones, and overall, as a faction, the power budget remains the same. Now, the one thing you have to be careful of is, of course, let's say a faction's comprised of just 4 cards in your hand. So each turn you play a card, that's it. That's the whole game. Well, okay, if one of those cards is 10 times stronger than the other ones, that might be balanced overall in terms of the power budget, but you're only going to ever play that one card every turn. So
if you have access to them at all times, yeah. If you're listening to the podcast and not watching the YouTube video, the visuals every time AJ is talking about the Prado Frontier don't exist. You're missing nothing. Let's talk a little bit about the literally we were playtesting, was it yesterday? God, it's been a big week. And we have a card, the Assassin Bug, who's one of the factions in our upcoming AEG game. And we wanted to change a card from, I can't remember what it was. We wanted to change it to move twice. And so we quickly pulled out the rest of the cards in the deck. And we found one that was move twice with push, which was just strictly better. So we needed to do literally this. So we sat down and this, I'm saying this because it's a really tangible, practical example of what we did in the last 24 hours. We sat down and we were like, okay, well, maybe this one is move once with push and then move. And this one is move twice and don't leave tracks, or move twice, but one of them must be to a flower. There was some. We basically took the one that was the most powerful and reduced it by half a step, so that we could bring the other one that was less powerful and bump it up by half a step, and have 2 roughly equal cards.
Mm-hmm. It's so valuable having those little knobs, even if they're not strictly numerical. We've got you can move twice, or you can jump, which is simply move twice, except you can move through someone. You jump over them, which is a subtle difference, but a very powerful, different effect. And it doesn't come with significant rules baggage either. It's a very natural extension of the rules.
I'm going to talk about Balatro a little bit. Sure. Balatro is I think it was Indie Game of the Year or Game of the Year or something. It is replaced Barbara's You as my favorite game. I love it. And in fact, if you want to hear me do a whole episode just talking about Balatro, let me know, because I would so happily do that. I have so many Balatro thoughts. I think about it all the time. I'm about to finish the final deck on Gold Stake, which if you know Balatro, you'll know that is 15 decks worth of going through all the stakes, and I've just been having a blast the whole time. Balatro, one of the big, I'm not going to go into too much details, but one of the big things is malt. So if you can add malt to a card, that is very good. If a card has malt, that's great. There's two ways to add malt to the cards in your hand. One is turning into a malt card, which is this card has 4 malt. The other way is this card has a 1 in 5 chance of making 20 malt, which numerically those are identical, but one in the game is pretty much always worse. So it's called a lucky card. 1 in 5 times it produces 20 malt, and 1 in 20 times it gives you $20. So it's such a funny difference between always getting 4 malt means you can rely on it's consistent. 1 in 5 times getting 20 malt is not quite as good because it's just so inconsistent. You could play 5 cards and get no malt from that and tank your whole run. But that 1 in 20 chance of getting $20 is such a powerful incentive that it makes it one of the most fun kind of archetypes of the game. And then obviously there's cards that affect odds and there's cards that let you re-trigger and blah, blah, blah. But just that for me is a really good example of the same thing, but the variability making it actually worse. And so they add a really fun buffer, because now if you're playing a round that re-triggers a lot and increases your odds, that's an economy card, which the 4 malt is never going to be an economy card. And so I think Balatro, this is why I could do a whole 2-hour episode just on Balatro. It's a microcosm of brilliant decisions every layer of that game. But that just really directly ties into the difference between the consistency and the inconsistency.
So I want to move on to how to assess how good something is, going back into the Printer Frontier, those sorts of concepts. A few different things you can do. You can look at what the rate is. So if I pay this much of a cost, what do I get comparably from other effects in the game? You can look at how easily can I get this effect elsewhere? Is this the only card
situational it is,
where I can do it?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Rarity.
Yeah, if this is the only card in the entire game that lets me fly, well, that makes it a lot more valuable because I'll never be able to get that again. What impact does it have on the game? Should be pretty self-explanatory, but what ripple effects can it cause? Not just the immediate thing, but what's the downstream effect of it? And what counterplay does my opponent have to this effect? Those are some questions that I think are worth asking yourself.
Gotcha. I was trying to work out how to turn that into examples. I'm trying to think of a very well-known game that we all know. Catan. Let's use the action cards in Catan. So the action cards in Catan are I would say they're all very situational.
But they're above rate.
What's that say?
But they're above rate, right? If
above
you buy
rate?
one of those cards above rate, so what you're paying for them, you get more than what you put in. I'm pretty sure there's a literal one where it's the amount of resources it costs you to buy it, it will then give you more resources than that because you had the random opportunity.
But the downside, of course, is you don't know which one you're getting at. I was thinking of something like the Monopoly card, which is potentially 20 resources. You could theoretically get 20 resources from the Monopoly card. The Monopoly card in Catan is pick a resource type. Everyone gives you all of that resource type from their hand. It's a very, very powerful, but you don't know what people have, and if you do know, it might not be the thing that you need, and so it's an example of the situationalness counters the power of it.
So synergy is really interesting because you get more than the sum of its parts. So how do you assess a synergistic card? There's a card in Rogue Book, which is a game by Richard Garfield. It's a digital CCG. It does 0 damage 5 times. So, first of all, new players look at this and it's kind of confusing. If you haven't seen any card boosting effects, you're I don't understand, and I don't like it for that reason. But that completely aside, it has obviously a floor of does literally nothing. Yeah. Floor being the worst possible case.
Does literally nothing 5 times.
Yes, at the cost of some amount of your mana. So the floor of the card is actively bad for you to play.
Right. That's because it has a cost and no benefit.
Yeah,
it's below rate.
Yeah, the ceiling, meaning the best possible case of the card, is extraordinarily high. If you have a bunch of stat boosting effects, each one of those effects is probably balanced around increasing a normal attack, not increasing it 5 times, which is effectively what this card reads.
Yeah.
So I think like the short answer, and obviously all of what we're saying here is an art, not a science, but when you're considering it, think about the floor, think about the ceiling, think about the average, think about how hard it is to achieve the ceiling and the floor, and remember that multipliers stack.
There is a keyword in Balatro which is just retrigger, and it means the card you activate again. So if I play, it's a poker based kind of system of play. So if I play it, in this game you can play multiple at the same time. So let's say I had five of clubs. If I have a retrigger every card, then cool. I've played 5 clubs, and then I've played another five of clubs. Like I've managed to do that twice. But when you have something like that lucky card that I was talking about earlier, it's a 1 in 5 chance of +4 mult and a 1 in 20 chance of $20, and then do it again. So you could theoretically, by retriggering one lucky card, you could get $40. It's very unlikely, but it's entirely possible. It gets really crazy because there are multiplier effects, which is different to mult. It's very confusing terminology. So, for example, there is a card that is just 1.5 times your whole score. Triggering that twice is 1.5 times 1.5, which is 2.25. There are different combos you can build that let you trigger that 7 times, and now suddenly you're in the 30s or the 40s or something. It just gets absolutely bananas. I've been playing a little bit of Slay the Spire. It's not for me, but I wanted to check it out because everyone loves it so much. And a really great example of this is just like do 3 damage versus do 1 damage 3 times. So it's like a less extreme version of the Richard Garfield one. If you have a +1 to every attack, the second one is, what's that, 0.3 times as good, 1.3 times as good. If you have an enemy who every time they're attacked they shield, it's much worse. It's just, it's a lot of fun. I think we've done episodes on design space before. It's one of my absolute obsessions. But like, if you have little stuff like this, then the design space expands in a really intuitive way, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like organic depth for the players, and it's more design space for you to create that depth with very little cost.
Yeah.
And cost being complexity in this case, not like a balance. Just for clarity.
And I just want to talk about this a little bit more. Why is this important?
Why is balancing important?
This specific kind of area we're talking about of like, why does it matter if one card is better than another?
So I think it goes to your goals. So again, if it's a strategic collapse thing, you want to make sure that all the cards have a use. It doesn't have to mean that every card is equally useful to you at this moment, but with like Slay the Spire or Balatro, presumably there would be a run where you were building a deck and this card would be a good, interesting, fun card for your deck.
Yeah.
If that is never the case, then you want to tune knobs and adjust how it functions in order to make it synergize or work well enough to be worth considering at some point.
And I think it's important to emphasize that like it has a use case. Again, I'm going to use Balatro. I've been playing a lot of Balatro lately. There are some really crappy jokers. There's one that's like, if it contains a pair, get 8 mult. And 8 mult is nothing. Like I said, a single card can provide 4 mult by itself as part of a larger synergy without taking up a joker slot. So a pair giving you 8 mult or whatever it is, like, cool, that's crap. But at the very start of your run where you are completely weak, that's a huge power boost. That can get you through the first, like, third of the game by itself. Not literally by itself, but like that could be a key part of getting you through the first third of the game. I also, while we're in this kind of area, I want to talk about when it is valuable to have some cards that are worse than others. Because it's something I really struggled with as a new designer. And I think we've probably talked about it before, but we've been going for 5 years. We're going to repeat topics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm totally down. I've got that as a note. Do you want to take lead on that, or shall I?
No, go ahead. If you guys, I just want to make sure we didn't miss it.
Yeah. So first off, imbalance is just not always a problem for a lot of reasons. I think one of the most obvious reason that you would have a card that is, for all intents and purposes, strictly worse than another, meaning you compare the two cards and it looks like there's like 99% of the time, one is always better than the other. Maybe there's some completely bizarre way, but basically for all intents and purposes, one is strictly better than the other. Why would you have a card that's worse than that? One is to show power progression. You start with something weaker, you get something stronger. The weak cards make the powerful cards feel better.
Yeah, we definitely have done an episode on Arc, and Arc is such an, like, if you can build arc into your game where you go from weak to strong, it is going to make your game just by itself more inherently fun.
Yes.
To use a bunch of buzzwords, but yeah.
Yeah, arc meaning over the course of the game. I'm trying to be more cognizant with our definitions and making sure that we bring new players along, new desires along, especially because I hope this one gets linked to people a lot. This is a good episode, people. Share it with your friends.
We've decided halfway through that it is a good episode.
I knew it was going to be a banger. I was doing the show notes. But arc meaning over the course of the game, things change and evolve. Generally speaking, you start weak and poor. You end the game powerful and rich, those sorts of things. It's very satisfying.
My favorite description of arc is the first turn feels radically different to the last turn or to a subsequent turn.
Yeah, because you don't necessarily have to be getting stronger over the course of the game. You could be weaker, but it's that difference in that progression that feels interesting, satisfying, and normally that's in getting stronger.
Yeah.
But I think that there's other use cases for weak cards too.
There's one big one I have in my head, so I'm curious if it's on your list.
Sure. So I've got a specific one with Sushi Go. So in Sushi Go, there are nigiri, I think they're called, that are worth 1 to 3 points. 1 is lower than 3. If you are comparing those two cards, you would not take the 1. I know, hot take, right? But the value of the other cards is relative. This is a drafting game. So the question isn't, is the 3 better than the 1? It's, is the 3 better than the other options in the pack? So a 3 is always going to be better than the 1, but the other top picks might be sashimi, which if you have a set of 3, then each of those 3 cards is worth 3.5 points. So the 3 on its own is clearly better than the 1, not necessarily better than the sashimi.
That's not quite right, because there's no like... That would be 10.5 if you had 3, which I don't think is a scoring option in Sushi.
Oh, yeah, you're right. No, it's 3 for 10, so it's 3.3
recurring.
Yeah, good catch.
But yeah, I want to jump in here. This is not my other point, but I think it's super relevant. There's also a moment of delight in like getting a good thing and giving your opponent trash. Like handing, like, you know, if let's say you drew a hand and it just had the 3 and the 1, it feels good to be like, I'm going to take the 3 and I'm going to give you the 1. There's not a strategic decision there, but it is still a feel-good moment. Don't build your whole game around that, but I think there is value in just like the dopamine of it, or
Sure.
Carry on.
And just to finish off that example, earlier I said that the sashimi could be worth more than the 3 nigiri. It could also be worth less. That's only a set of 3 is worth 10 points. So the 1 might actually be better than in some contexts. So those different contexts change the evaluation, which can be really interesting. Do you have any other thoughts on making...
Oh, yes. You didn't do my big one. Okay, so this is, I think, perhaps the biggest reason to do variable values. And that is...
Variable values or like strictly weaker, you mean?
Strictly stronger, strictly weaker.
Sure, okay.
And that is... I'm going to use a term, this is not quite what I mean, but you'll understand. The push your luck element. So I'm going to use Quacks of Quedlingberg. You can, in your bag to start with, you have... If you hit 7 white tokens, you bust. Or more than 7, I think it is. In your bag, you have 3s and you have 1s. And you have 2. You have a 3 and you have 1s and you have a 2. 3 is strictly worse than 1 in every way. But there is a gambling element to it. So that's an example where it's given to you. Let's use, again, I'm in Balatro world. In Balatro, you can re-roll the shop any number of times. It costs you $1 more each time you do. So the first time costs 5, then 6, then 7. And so if you roll the shop and it's just all crappy jokers, there is a psychological incentive to roll it again because you might strike lucky. You might hit a joker that is just flat out better. You might hit a joker that is flat out worse. If every joker is equally good, you don't recreate that effect. I have a game that I was working on about 6 months ago, maybe a little bit more, where you would basically you could spend to draw cards from a deck. So it was draw 3, choose 1. And if every card was good, you would do it once, pick the best card and be done. But let's say 1 in 10 cards is worth 10 times the rest, you're going to hit that again and again. And it is a genuinely strategic decision. How much do I push my luck, et cetera, et cetera. So there are definite reasons to have completely imbalanced things for psychological reasons that lead to super interesting decisions. And I wanted to make sure we flag that because, I mean, it's in our game with... The locusts in the AEG game is a very literal Quedlingberg mechanism where you can draw a token that's worth 1 action point, or you can draw one that's worth 2 action points, or you can draw one that busts your game and is worth nothing. And those are all, like, if they were all equally valuable, it would be an interesting puzzle.
Yep. Good call-outs. Peter, do you have a definition for tempo?
In music?
No, in games. Have you not heard this term before?
I've heard it. It's very, like, you live in the TCG world 100 times more than me. So I think tempo is very much a TCG term.
Yeah. So tempo I've seen used in a lot of different ways. I'm going to give a really bad definition and then give a much better example.
I think of it as curve shapes. Is that an accurate sort of...
I'm just going to go really broad here.
Okay.
I think of tempo as a term that can be applied in a lot of different ways, like play patterns. There's a lot of different ways you can use the term play patterns. And tempo refers to the pacing of play. So here's my example to fix that bad definition, and then Peter can do a better one because he's very good at what's that, wordsmithing?
Wording is the term.
Languaging, yeah.
Wordmining.
So there are two cards in Magic the Gathering that have a nice mirror to each other. I'm so glad to talk about this example. I think I wrote this down like literally the year that we started Fun Problems, and I was like, I don't know when I'm going to talk about this, but I'm going to talk about it. This is the perfect example of tempo versus card advantage. So there's a card, very famous in Magic, the most famous card, Black Lotus.
Yes.
Black Lotus is a card that costs nothing. You sacrifice it, you get 3 mana. So effectively, you have spent 1 resource, a card, to get mana. There's another card, Divination. It costs 3 mana. You draw 2 cards, meaning you have netted a total of 1 card because Divination replaced itself. It was 1 card in your hand. Now you've got 1 more. So in one case, you spent a card to get 3 mana. In the other case, you spent 3 mana to get 1 card. This is the perfect encapsulation of...
Black Lotus, does it not cost any mana?
It does not cost any mana.
Okay, gotcha.
So it is the perfect mirror here. So think of mana in this example as tempo. You give up a card to gain tempo with the Black Lotus, and you give up tempo to gain a card with Divination. The tempo is the pace of the play, and so things that slow down your opponent and things that speed up you, that is gaining you tempo as a resource. And does that make sense?
I don't think you've and maybe I'm just dense, but I don't think you've explained what like you've said tempo is cards.
No,
but that's not really what tempo is.
No, tempo is the pacing of play. So by playing a Black Lotus, you have sacrificed a card to get 3 mana, which means you can then use that mana to do something on the board. You have gained board presence.
Are you trying to say acceleration? Maybe is that the word?
Yeah, I suppose so. If you sacrifice some resources in order to
get more resources.
Yeah, it's tricky because it's like certain resources I would say are tempo based and some aren't. I want to spend too long hammering away this awkward definition, but the point with balancing is just a consideration of what resources you're cashing in for what and how much tempo you are allowing your players to gain. To your early point, adding to my definition, adding to my list of design balance goals of not being overpowered and winning turn 1. The winning turn 1 is because you've given players too much access to speeding up the tempo of the game. If you want your game to last X number of turns and it always lasts X number of turns and then it's over, then players cannot control the tempo of the game in terms of how many turns they have, but they could potentially control the tempo in terms of how many things get deployed in those turns. So yeah, tempo I think of as the pacing of the game.
I think my 2 issues with this definition, and again I don't want to dive into it too deep, is that like it's if you said the pacing of the game, I'd be like, oh, how long someone takes to think about their turn, and that's not at all what you mean. Like it's just such a broad side of term. So let's break it down. Let's break down the game because I think that's such a broad term. How fast someone builds their engine, or how far someone moves towards their goal. Are you talking about one or both of those, or neither?
I'm talking about both of those.
Okay, gotcha. So
that's why it's tricky to nail down a definition because it is applied in a lot of different ways.
Right. I think so. When Magic, and again, I'm not a Magic player. I played it as a teenager, but I haven't really touched much since. When Magic is talking about tempo, are they talking about dealing damage, or is it just anything that moves you ahead?
Anything that moves you ahead.
Okay, gotcha.
Or puts your opponent behind.
Right. So like discarding cards from their hand or anything like that.
Well, discarding cards isn't actually. So here's a good example, or hopefully this is a good example to help you understand. If I spend 1 mana to play a card that then makes you discard a card, I have given up tempo for something else. I've spent that one turn of spending mana to not actually get ahead on the board and advance me towards winning the game. I have spent my mana to do something else, to attack your cards as a resource. Whereas on your turn one, you could play a creature, and then that creature's attacking me every turn and doing stuff on the board. I have given up tempo to hopefully disrupt you enough to make up for that tempo later because you aren't able to.
I think you're right. I think this is like a few concepts sort of broadly like shoved under one. I want to talk about efficiency games, and I want to talk about Soulforge. So Ruins of Arnak is one of my favorite games, and that is a pretty pure efficiency game. The game is going to last 5 turns. There are 5 turns, and then you count points and declare a winner. The amount of stuff that you can do on a turn is hugely like engine building driven. So, for example, like if you can just get one more action or one more turn, basically in the first round, that can lead to 20 more turns in the final round. It is an insane escalation of like efficiency. So that would be that I think falls under tempo, but I would call that an efficiency engine building sort of type of tempo, right?
Sure.
Soulforge had a creature, I can't remember what it's called, but it was basically a 7/7 with trample. And as I mentioned, Soulforge had no costs at all. So if you drew the 7/7 with trample, you could play it, and in the first turn, almost when it comes back to you on your next turn, almost guaranteed do 5+ damage. The average creature on level 1 is 2 to 5 health. So 7/7 is huge. It's probably going to eat a whole creature and then a second one and deal damage both times that it's doing that. Every time you play a card in Soulforge, a upgraded version to the next level goes into your deck for the next round. So basically you shuffle it's weird. Like a clone goes to your discard pile and the original's removed from the game, and then you draw the clone when you shuffle your deck. So it's a deck builder. Brilliant mechanism. So that one was a 7/7 at level 1, an 8/8 at level 2, and a 9/9 at level 3, which is a crazy slow progression. My favorite card in the game was called the Technomancer. That was a 2/2 at level 1, a 0/10 at level 2, and a 20/20 at level 3. And so it's just, maybe it was a 2/10 at level 2, but it was just like, it was a very extreme power. There was a legendary called Chagrias who was a 1/1, a 0/15, and then a 30/30 with trample. So basically you did nothing for the first 2, but if you get that level 3 out, unless they have some crazy counter that will immediately kill it, you've won the game.
Mm-hmm.
So those are, and again, this is, I guess it's sort of engine building, but this is a much more immediate tempo contrast to me, where it's about dealing damage to your opponent. Is that an accurate kind of?
Yeah, this is an excellent example. So, for instance, just to use the term the way that I would, if let's say you had a card that was like a 0/1 and then a 0/1 and then a 100/100. You have given up tempo the first 2 times you played it. It didn't do something and have immediate impact in order to gain a massive late game advantage. Versus if you had a large creature up front and then it got weaker or didn't scale as much, you get a lot of tempo up front for the cost of it not being as strong later on.
Okay, so I think the way you're using tempo, based on this conversation, is immediate effects.
Yes, but also it could relate to. I guess it's still an immediate effect, but something that can help you engine build for longer. If you have something that like you play at turn 1 and that generates you a resource every turn of the game, then you're effectively giving up tempo turn 1 to gain tempo every single future turn of the game.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think tempo is a bad term because it's being used to like do 4 different conflicting things, and I can't quite get my fingers around its slippery definition. Is this a good place to take an episode break?
Let's, just because we were talking about tempo, I'll slide into one more thing and then we'll go.
Great.
So, talking about costs, there's one that's sort of tempo related. If you have,
by the way, if you're on a Discord, give us your definition of tempo, and we'll pick the best one.
Sure.
And read it out, because right now tempo is it's like the word. hand in poker, it means like three different conflicting things, or trick in trick taking. Like there's just these terms that just mean a few different things, and it's very hard to define.
So just talking about costs for effects and things. In Pokemon, you've got EX Pokemon, and the cost of them is when they die, they give your opponent twice the victory points, effectively.
Oh, I didn't know about this.
And so, I'm sorry?
I've not encountered these. These mustn't be in the generations I've played.
Yeah, they're more modern and really badly designed. So the problem in having
there goes our Pokemon sponsorship. Thanks, AJ.
The problem is in having them give extra VP when they die as the only cost, while having lots of attack and lots of HP. It means they can, punch down all of your opponent's creatures and kill them, and it's very hard to kill them, so they get to last for a long time, and it's safer for you to like retreat them into safety.
Right.
So that deferred cost in many cases isn't actually ever paid, or they win the game before you would actually have to pay it. So using tempo again, Peter's favorite word, you gain a lot of tempo for no cost there. I feel
like using tempo synonymously with like results. You're giving up results now in exchange for results later. This one gives you a lot of results for no cost.
I'm not going to respond.
Okay.
Not because I'm mad at you. Just I don't feel this is a productive conversation, even though I'm going to keep using the word.
Cool. I'm just going to mentally sub it out for results every time you use it until it stops working.
You do you, my friend. So another way to think about costs is resources that you weren't using weren't actually a cost. This is another thing I think about in Magic the Gathering a lot. Your life total is a resource. What you don't lose the game until you go to 0. And yes, obviously you have to play differently if you have a low HP total because they can attack you and stuff like that. But generally speaking in Magic, if you can pay even a huge amount of HP to gain a small amount of mana, you weren't using that HP anyway, and the amount of tempo that you gain for spending that HP is enormous. So if you're going to make the cost something that you're not using or something that doesn't have an immediate effect, try to think of ways that you can layer in effects. My favorite example of this one is in Seven Wonders Duel, where you've got this combat track, and you win the game if you get to the end of the combat track. But if that's all it was, then it would feel really useless.
You ignore it until it's at the end, yeah.
Exactly. It wouldn't matter until that very last point. So it's not a real cost for the opponent to ignore it. However, sorry, got my throat stuck a little bit. They put little roadblocks in it, so once you cross certain thresholds, you get to steal or make
destroy.
The opponent lose money. Destroy. Thank you. So that's
which is thematic too, which I really like.
Totally. So that's a nice way of making sure that there is actually a cost and a granulated set of things. A comparison for Magic could be something along the lines of abilities that get stronger if your opponent's weaker, things like that. But just something to
that's much better than I was going to suggest one that I immediately hated, which was that like every time you pass a 5 health threshold, you lose a card. The problem with that is now it's a win harder mechanism.
Right. Cool. All right. Yeah. Let's stop here. Do you want to cue me up for fun? Oh no, wait. Yeah. No, wait. I'm queuing you up for design stuff. We do that first, right?
Yeah, I can't remember, but yes. As you know, my memory of the order of events at the end of episodes is far from my strongest skill. So I'd like to end every episode with a sort of publishing tip. And today I'm actually going to be responding to a YouTube comment. Someone asked, I'm wondering what you mean by Kickstarters need stretch goals. And this is going into our publishing tip section because I think it's a really interesting way to think about product. I've talked before about the Zoe York trilogy of romance selling books that I read. It's called oh my God, I can't remember them. I'm going to quickly Google it because it's going to annoy me. But basically, they're books about how to write and sell romance books for a market. Romance Your Brand, that's the name of the series. And because it's so disconnected from board games, I found it incredibly helpful for reframing how I think about board games. So again, this is our publishing tip. I'm allowed to be as publishing heavy as I want. One way to design games, this ties into the exercise we did at the start of the episode, is to think about the final step of the sale. And I've talked about this a lot before as like the final step, but in this case, I mean the point where the publisher is selling it to the consumer. How do they see that? How do they encounter it? If you can build your game to that, So, for example, Critter Kitchen, we knew that was going to go on Cardboard Alchemy's Kickstarter. And Cardboard Alchemy, we know their brand very well. They love stretch goals. They're actually, ironically, got a Kickstarter running right now with no stretch goals. But as a company, as a rule, they love stretch goals. They go stretch goal, stretch goal, stretch goal. So during the design process, we'd already designed the game. And if you listen to our design diary, you'll know all this. But we had designed the game and pitched it. And then when we're at the point of like developing it, getting it ready for publication, we were very focused on like, okay, cool. How can we make little content hooks? So we knew that game was going to go to Kickstarter. And so we wanted to make sure that the game as a product was as Cardboard Alchemy Kickstarter friendly as possible. And so what I meant by Kickstarters need stretch goals is if you're running a Kickstarter, as in like all the bells and whistles and the stretch goals and the community hype and all that, you need to be unlocking stuff that gets people excited. And if you want to be unlocking stuff that makes people excited, you've got to have that in your game. AJ and I've run into this a little bit with our AG game where we're like, man, this game is complete. How do we make stuff that gets people excited? And we work that away. It's really cool. I hope it goes ahead because we are now in love with this whole thing anyway, and we want to do it for itself. But it came out of being like, how do we make cool, sexy, fun Kickstarters because this is going to be a Kickstarter game? If it's not going to be a Kickstarter game, if it's going to be a retailer game, start thinking, how does the back of the box sell this game? Zoe York's theory was that, I think it might have changed since then, but basically most romance novels are sold through Facebook ads. So how do I make a novel that will Facebook ad really well? So she wrote her biggest hit, which was a military small town series, because she knew that people love small town books and they love military books and they love series. So she basically Frankensteined those together into, I've read all of them, the Pine Harbor series, they're quite lovely. The middle are quite lovely. The ends, it starts weak and it ends weak, but the middle is really good. And so she visualized the cover. She was like, how is this going to sell? Military small town. And then how can I build it into a series? So it's about 5 brothers who are all from this small town and all worked in the military at some point. And so each of the brothers gets, like, it's just all there in the conception. So what I meant by Kickstarters need stretch goals was if you are building this game for a Kickstarter-based company, and I always try to have a company in mind when I'm building a game, what are they going to do to stretch it out? Because if you have nothing, it's going to be really forced and tacky. It's going to be really like, I don't know, you get a bag with a face on it. It's like, cool, that has nothing to do with the game. You want stuff that makes people excited about the game. With Critter Kitchen, that was where a lot of the carts came from. We were like, we want to unlock a cart every X $1,000. And how do we make them cool? One cart comes with gold coins. One cart comes with little pie dials. One cart comes with a die. Each one of these is like, oh man, that's so tactile. I can see how that would play. I want to get my hands on that. So yeah, Kickstarters need stretch goals. Build your game to wherever you want to sell it.
Good tip.
AJ, how do you feel about having a baby with me right now?
I think I'd rather have some fun.
Fine. You win this round. See, you do win. I'll just edit this part out.
So this is an interesting question that my wife asked me recently. And
she said, how do you feel about having a baby with Peter right now?
Oh, dear. No, thank you. So I think, these are divisive times. People...
I'm getting political? Wow, this is...
No, we're avoiding being political, but I think that it's very useful to reflect on things you believe and consider whether or not they're true and what the other side has to say. As soon as we start dehumanizing their side, that's when problems happen.
Yes.
So this is an interesting
not fun
question.
Problems either.
Yeah. So this is an interesting question my wife asked me. She said, what percentage of beliefs, opinions, facts etc., would you estimate are wrong? Do you think you're the 1% on planet Earth who knows absolutely everything?
No, I mean, I got to dive into what it means for a belief to be wrong.
Well, so if you believe that the best way to solve an invasive species problem is to put out a bounty on heads of that invasive species.
Right. The cobra problem.
Yeah, those sorts of things. Every one of your beliefs, every one of your religious beliefs, political beliefs, every one of the fun facts you think you know, what percentage of those do you think are actually wrong?
Man, I don't even know where to start with that.
It's tricky, huh?
Yeah, I think I'm getting stuck in the definitions, as I often do with these fun problems. So let's say I had a belief that humanity is fundamentally good. Well, cool. What is like how is that right or wrong? What does it mean to be good? Like it fractals down so much that I'm like, I don't know where this question ends.
Let me slightly rephrase. For every one of those that has an objective truth, whether or not you know that objective truth, like if you had omniscience and you could like see everything for exactly how it was, and you know which percentage of those things that are objectively measurable.
I got to follow up more. So now it's the word beliefs that I'm curious about. Like, I believe that I'm talking to you right now. Does that count as one of my beliefs?
I mean, no. I think.
Right.
I think
so
I could ask a different question if you want.
No. It's just I just need to understand the question, because like if we're talking about knowledge that I have of how the world works versus stuff that I know that I don't know, but I have an opinion one way or the other. Once it's all facts, the percentage gets way higher, because I'm like, well, I believe that this is a microphone and that I've got hair and that I'm a human and that I'm wearing a shirt. But once you go out of, okay, cool, objective facts gone, then it's like, well, then it's all opinions. Let me try to ask the question back in a different way that I think captures what you're trying to say, but in a way that works with my brain.
Sure.
How many of your moral beliefs do you think will be mainstream in 100 years' time? Or widely accepted? Because I think that's what you're trying to capture. For people listening on the podcast, AJ's doing a little dance during this long silence.
What's your answer?
I'd go with around 50. It's kind of a cowardice answer, but I think about half. This is something I think about a lot. So this is a topic that actually Nicole Cutler and Alex Cutler, friend of the podcast, and I were on a road trip in 2019, or maybe even very early 2020. And Nicole asked me the equivalent of this. She said, "What do we think now that will just be incontrovertibly like untrue or different or like wildly changed in 5 or 10 years?" And then 2 months later, COVID happened. And so it was this really like, wow, we did not expect it. Like that wasn't in our belief system at all, that the whole world could shut down for a period of 6 months. We didn't see it coming. So the ones that I think about are particularly around gender, vegetarianism. I had a third one, but it's gone. So for example, I identify as a male. I use he, him pronouns. I think if I'd been born in 100 years' time, I would probably be they, them, and pretty much everyone would. Maybe not literally everyone, but I think that would be the majority. If I'd been born 100 years ago, I would never have even questioned it at all.
See, I think a lot about trends and stuff like that, and I think there's just so many like splintering opinions. And I think as time goes on, the splinters are going to continue and become really entrenched. So I don't know that a lot of my beliefs are going to be like widespread adopted to like, to the point where it's such commonplace. Like we still have people who don't believe that the earth is round. Like, sorry if you're a listener and you think that the world is flat. I guess we disagree, but I don't know. I'll say an optimistic 70%.
Wow, that is optimistic. I particularly think about this, and let me know if this is going into too much detail and not fun anymore, about monogamy, because I identify as polyamorous, and I have since when I was 14, I encountered the term, and I was really like, oh, that's me. And since then, I have just always identified as polyamorous. And I think about the word technology a lot. Actually, this directly relates to board games, so I'm going to dive into it. I think about the word technology, because technology doesn't mean machine, it doesn't mean electronics, it doesn't mean any of that. It means a new idea, essentially. And so I think Jim Henson 50 years ago cheated on his wife, and then they got a divorce, Jane Henson. And my housemate, who I used to live with, she was like, that's outrageous. I thought he was a good guy, blah, blah, blah. And I was sort of like, yeah, obviously don't cheat on your wife. That's bad. But also he didn't have the technology that we have these days of non-monogamy. Had I never encountered the word polyamory at 14, I guarantee I would have cheated on all my partners. Not because I think I'm a bad person, but because I am hardwired not to be monogamous. Monogamy makes me feel trapped and I just have to break out of it. And I have been given the technology to be like, oh, cool, I can have multiple girlfriends, I can have multiple partners without it being a moral issue. If I don't have that technology, in the same way as, gay people in the 1800s probably cheated on their wives with other men because they didn't have any other way to live. And so for me being like, people in the past, how dare they not follow our moral codes? To me is the equivalent of like medieval knights. Why didn't they use a gun? What an idiot. Like, I think it's actually a parallel. And the reason I say it's relevant to board games is because board game technology has not like fundamentally changed, but board game technology has, like, even in the last 10 years, evolved so much. And I don't mean like apps and stuff like that. I mean the stuff we talk about on this podcast, the idea of variable paths to victory and balance and like, skip a turn mechanics. That, roll and move. Roll and move used to be the technology that people had to make board games. So every board game had to be a roll and move. And since then, we've invented alternate technologies. I realize I'm using technology in a weird way, but I hope it's making sense. So I think that a lot of the beliefs I have are either so mainstream that I just accept them without thinking, such as not being a vegetarian. I mean, I realize vegetarianism is fairly mainstream, but like gender, like people look at Harry Potter and they're like, what a stupid society. They arbitrarily divide everyone up into 4 houses and that just defines the next 7 years of their life. And it's like, we kind of do that with babies. Like, we fairly arbitrarily put them into one of 2 things. Then we're like, how you like trucks and you like dolls, and that is who you are as a person. Like,
didn't you see the pink aisle? That aisle's for you.
Right. And it's this arbitrary split that we are just so entrenched in that we don't question it. My sister came out as trans, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and it made me sit down and for the first time, even though I've had a trans husband, I've had trans girlfriends, and I've known lots of trans people, that was the first time I was ever like, what is my gender identity? Because it was so close to home and such a like normal part of my life that I'd never considered it. And that is a technology that we did not have 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And the very, very rare person who identified as any kind of two-spirit or non-binary or anything like that was by far the wild exception. I am, in my life, the wild exception on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I had a blue beard well before it was a thing that people did. I have never had like I've not had a 9-to-5 job for 15 years. I've had a creative career. I was an early internet person, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm polyamorous. There's so many ways where I just don't live by the mainstream way of things. And yet, I am aware how fully entrenched I am in like mainstream society, even for how far on one end of the bell curve I am. I think that whole bell curve will shift over 100 years. And that's why I'm like, I don't know, 50%. I think right now I'm at a pretty far end of the bell curve, and the bell curve will shift to meet me and I'll be right in the middle. But that's obviously an arbitrary guess.
You know what's interesting is I'm like, if you're like the wacky weird one, which you are, I'm like the most boringest sort of element, or at the very least, I definitely was like, I think if you just like took a poll, I would be like the most average male in a lot of senses. And belief systems, all those sorts of things. And I think one thing I try to pride myself on, or I try to work on, and I pride myself on, is working on myself, and is like trying to listen to other people's opinions who I disagree with. And I've actually changed a lot from where I started.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm not sure how much I want to talk about on the podcast. But,
yeah. If it stops being fun, take it out of fun. This has gone on so long, I'm actually going to pivot it back to board game advice.
Let's do it.
I have my face. If you're listening to the podcast, just imagine that I have a face. My face has caused a huge impact on double-digit people's lives. Because when they met me, I've had this blue beard for 15 years now. When people meet me and they get to know me and they hang out with me and they're like, oh, he's a human who exists. Like, maybe for listeners I'm not this like abstract figure. I have a apartment and a toilet and a bath and a kitchen. Like, I do all the normal human stuff that humans do. I'm not an abstract concept. This is a person who exists as a human being who has colored hair, is the only way that people are like, I could have colored hair, in the same way as I needed to see my sister go through a gender identity shift to be like, I could go, like, it, even though I've been exposed to it as much as everyone has. Like, trans stuff is constant in all the media, and that sounded really denigrating. You know what I mean? Like, it is a thing that we are regularly exposed to. And yet I needed someone who I was very close with to expose me to it, to actually even question it for myself. I have been that person on the much more trivial affair of colored hair. So I can name lots of people who had never even considered coloring their hair. They got to know me, and within a year they colored their hair because they're like, that's a thing that any human can do. This is why, I told you, I'm bringing you back to board game advice. This is why we say play games. Play a diversity of games, play new games, play old games, because if you only have this one technology available to you, sorry, I'm going to tangent again, because this is the most clear-cut black and white example I think has ever existed. There is a YouTube channel called Cracking the Cryptic that I and AJ worked with for many years. They do Sudoku puzzles, and we published a bunch of their Sudokus in books, and they had a viral video. I think it's like 5 million views or some crazy number of views, where someone took a magic square, which is a 3x3 grid where all the columns, rows, and diagonals add up to the same number, and put it in the middle of Sudoku, and they solved that, and that one went super viral. It's just this crazy viral thing. They got, I would estimate, thousands of submissions of Sudokus with magic squares. That is not an inherent aspect of Sudoku, but that was what people were exposed to as the first ever variant Sudoku. I used to be really active in their setters channel, and every new person for the next 6 months came in with a magic square Sudoku because that was what they knew. If you are only exposed to one technology, in this case magic squares in variant Sudokus, that is your default starting point always, and it's really hard to break out of that. Just as humans, we're not built to do that. So play games and be like, oh, I had never even thought that you could do this. I've been playing with Abacho, I'm designing roguelikes. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's why there's so many roll and moves done by family gamers or kids or that sort of thing.
You ask any layman to design a game and their first is going to be roll and move because that's the only technology they have available to them. So as a board game designer, expose yourself to different technologies. If you're like, I like area controls, cool. But if you only play area controls, you'll see some technology, but not as many as you would if you went out and played, push your luck games and this and that. And then you can bring new technologies into your genre. And to your point, AJ, one thing that you're doing is you're exposing yourself to different beliefs. And now they are options, where before you had fewer options.
Yeah. And just one more example on the board game spectrum. I was playtesting a friend's game once, and he had told me about the pitch for it, and I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. I want to try it. And he's like, yeah, it's not quite working. And he showed it to me, and basically there's action selection, then puzzle you do with the things you get, right? The action selection was super cool. The puzzle wasn't working super duper well. And I had played a game that did something where I could just say, well, if we just apply that same principle, in practice, it's very, very different. But the principle of it is the same. You have a card that is both a recipe and a component for other recipes in the spatial puzzle. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, that's just an immediate cool thing that could work really well.
It's a new technology, that you can.
It's not that I'm some sort of genius who just came along and solved the problem immediately. It was just I had played that and I had that technology in my mind, so I was able to apply it.
If you'd played it, toolbox.
If you'd played it, you probably would have done the same thing.
So to answer your initial question, what percentage of my beliefs do I think are true? The reason I can't answer that is because of the way that I see the world. And the question for me is, how many of your technologies could be improved by better technologies? And the answer is all of them. Every way I have seen the world, there's probably some better way of doing it. Polyamory is a technology that we have, but in 500 years, they'll invent, polyamory too.
Super polyamory.
Polyomino-amory. And that'll just fit me better. But it's not more correct or less correct. And so that's why I really struggle with that question. So pardon my 25-minute answer to quite a good question.
No worries. It's a good thing that we didn't get political. That's the important thing.
Thanks everyone for listening. AJ, how do we end this podcast?
By saying goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. You can find us and our incredible Discord community in the show notes, or reach out to us privately at funproblemspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed the podcast, please tell a friend.